So this is the second part of the KhoodeelaarTV World Exclusive Diagnosis of Fleet Street. And when we say diagnosis of Fleet Street, we of course mean evidence-based, ethical, objective examination of the contents and the role played by the newspapers that are collectively known as Fleet Street because they are the English language papers that is published from the center of the capital city, London. And they are collectively known after the street called Fleet Street, where most of the previous papers were housed. The addresses were in Fleet Street, including the group that owns the Daily Borisgraph. In the Daily Telegraph for a long time, there was a column called the Peterborough column. That was the gossip. So there is a Peterborough Street, small lane off the Fleet Street there, near the building where the Telegraph used to be housed in Fleet Street. Fleet Street literally is only about 100 or 200 years away from the cathedral called St. Paul's Cathedral. So, but it is the Fleet Street that still remains the name of the collective titles. Today's Sunday versions of the papers that we have purchased cost £18.30 or £18.50. Not all of them, because the three papers that are part of these, or two papers actually, the I newspaper and the Financial Times, they are not on sale today, Sunday, because they have got weekend editions, both of them, that are published on the Saturday, including the Sunday. And the counterpart away from Fleet Street is the so-called Communist Party controlled Morning Star. And the Morning Star is called so by us, our campaign, exclusively, because it distorts the evidence, despite the fact that it boasts of being the only newspaper in the English language in the whole world that is the left newspaper in English. That is absurd and that is stupid, because there are many English language outfits published across the continents that claim to be supporting or propagating the communist agenda. As to the identity of the communist agenda, we cannot begin to discuss that because it would take quite a lot of time. Suffice to say that there is no country on the planet that is run by communists and is actually also accommodating democracy, ethics, accountability, and lack of corruption or opposition to corruption. The failure of the communist project is not down so much to the communist ideology or the core of it, but to the people who practice and use this as a slogan, as a career thing. And therefore, there is this conflict between the communist ideology and the communist kind of regimes, the communist kind of politicians. Whatever the details, the claim by the Communist Party Morning Star that it is the world's only left-wing English language newspaper is absolutely unfounded, because there are, as I said, titles in Asia as well as in Africa. And that is even not counting the claims of China itself. China has the biggest operation, communist operation in the whole world, but whatever the name, the details and the facts and the behavior of the communist named regime in China is not at all consistent with the communist ideology in the textbook or objectively verified. But that is another matter. But the fact is that the Communist parties claim, the British Communist parties claim, that its publication, the Morning Star, which we call the Morning Star because it lies, is the only English language newspaper of the whole world, is absolute rubbish. And the fact that it is engaged in lying and distorting and corrupting the evidence can be seen in the way that it has covered Afsana Begum and her being under a charge, 3.3 count charge of housing fraud. Remember, the Morning Star is based at a location in Tower Hamlets Borough. It is probably covered by Afsana Begum's constituency. But even if it doesn't, it is still based in Tower Hamlets, London E3. And the Communist Morning Star frenetically, zealously avoids reporting on Tower Hamlets Council's corruption, criminality, and the rest of it. So their exception in promoting the statement issued by Afsana Begum through her solicitors is doubly aggravating and corrupt. Because as we have been covering, housing fraud or fraud in Tower Hamlets Council is rampant. And the fact that a handful of fraudsters, housing fraudsters, have been caught and kind of prosecuted and convicted does not in any way show that Tower Hamlets Council otherwise is fraud-free or anti-fraud. The entire council is dedicated to perpetrating fraud and corruption, both via the incumbent elected mayor as well as by individual and collective councillors. And every single councillor on Tower Hamlets Council can be found to be complicit in one way or another, by silence or actively, in hiding and in denying the lies and the corruption and criminality that make up the Tower Hamlets Council as it is now and as it has been made up for decades, since being created in April 1965. And there is no evidence that Tower Hamlets Council has got any ethical, democratic, accountable kind of process in place or procedures in place. First of all, to identify signs of corruption and fraud, and then to act to stop corruption and fraud. That means that the Tower Hamlets Council is engaged in denial, and not just about housing fraud, but about everything else that it is in existence to supposedly deliver to the community in Tower Hamlets. And we highlight the gross kind of corruption that has been disclosed during the tribunal application by Mark Edmonds, although much of the documents released under that request that was made during Mark Edmonds' application against Armed Council. The application was not against Armed Council on corruption, but it was an unfair dismissal application. Now that itself exposes the legal system in this country as completely useless. Mark Edmonds' evidence and the main grounds of his claim against Armed Council was about corruption. And as I was saying, the documents that were reluctantly disclosed by the Armed Council in response to Mark Edmonds' application were redacted heavily. Even so, what remained in the unredacted parts contained enough information about the corruption, rampant corruption in the Armed Council. And he was focusing on the corruption and criminality that went on in the in-house youth disservice. The disservice is the word that I'm using, not him. So the tribunal obviously failed to understand any of it. And the tribunal is not a machine. Tribunal is made of human beings, and most of them who sit as tribunal persons in this country are on the side of the council or the status quo. And that means that they are themselves involved in complicity with and collusion with the crooked councils. Most of the contents of tribunal kind of hearings give away the game that the tribunal personnel, the so-called judges, are engaged in perpetuating and perpetrating. So this is a theme that we have covered in detail before, and we are now doing as an updater, kind of in context of the claim that the Communist Morning Star makes about its unique position. It is not the world's only English language newspaper of the left, and it is not a newspaper at all. It's a collection of few kind of releases approved by the Communist Party, whatever the size of the Communist Party in Britain. And the Communist Party is not anywhere near principled in accordance with the principles, objective principles of objectively defined communism. It's a cabal like one of the British left cabals. And all the British left are crooked outfits. And as the evidence shows, they are not far removed from the role of espionage and agents provocateurs. And that is what they're doing. And quite exact details of the Communist Party's role may not be publicly available, but the record of the Communist Party's roles as contained in the Morning Star is sufficient proof of its identity and its role and its location, which is not very far from the UK-based outfit called the Socialist W whatever. That used to be, until the 70s, known as the International Socialists. It's a racist outfit, and it is the most active front that surfaces outside contentious kind of events, demonstrations organized by other people. And the Socialist W appears mysteriously with ready-made, factory-made placards that can only be mechanically produced within the previous few hours. Now, that kind of speed takes a lot of cost and resources, as anyone who is involved in physical production of materials like placards and posters. And they have sometimes banners as well, but most of the times they've got placards and posters. And those are manufactured at such speed because so many of the events that are organized at short notice. And the socialist W appear at extra speed. That is not possible by volunteer members. That is only possible by an army, organized, disciplined army of personnel, whatever the number. It may be 5, it may be 50, it may be 100. But the socialist W is not socialist. It's an outfit of also provocateurs, an outfit of obstructors to genuine campaigns and organizations. One of its biggest achievements has been the perpetration of the slogan that it is supportive of the people of Palestine. It is the most ridiculous kind of claim. And the same can apply to its claim that it supports opposition to wars. So many of the wars that it supposedly opposes are going on. And there is no narrative based on the evidence of the UK, big business and the military industrial complex branches operating in and from the UK being centrally involved in the creation of the wars. So the Socialist W and the Communist Party Morning Star are also provocateurs and agents of the status quo. It follows, therefore, that the Morning Star's cover-up of Afsana Begum, of the alleged kind of prosecution and charging of Afsana Begum, doesn't talk about Hrs Council's corruption. It doesn't talk about the aggravation caused by Hrs Council and other councils similar to it, like the next door Newham Council, to the people whose housing human rights are denied through these councils. So, there is no evidence contained in the coverage of the Morning Star that justifies their boast that is the world's only English language left-wing newspaper. It is not a newspaper, it is not left-wing. It is corrupt wing. And the Sunday People, which is part of the Daily Mirror group, and they have got loads and loads of kind of copy about Sean Connery, the actor who died. And there is a column by somebody called K.R. Muddy, that advises that the only good policies can unite the Labour Party to win back Britain's trust. Now that is a very cheap and lazy kind of headline. And they've got a cartoon showing Jeremy Corbyn suspended. That's the cartoon that shows Corbyn in a position of suspension, hanging, that is, hanging from a kind of suspender. And there is an investigation into scary advice given to parents about a particular disease and particular cure and treatment. This is again a rare piece by the Sunday People. It hardly runs any investigations. And there is a 2-page spread on this kind of movie about Diana. And that includes a suggestion that Brenda's son Charlie, also known as Brian, was to blame, and so on. So this newspaper, the Sunday People, is not talking about the serious issues of the failures of the Boris Johnson fronted government. And they're not examining the operation of the lockdown and its impact in any significant, realistic way. And they're not examining the fact that when there is a lockdown, people start panic buying. And the supply chains and the impact the shortages have on the people who can't get to do rush shopping is left alone. They're not actually examining the impact on the people, the kind of additional impact of the lockdown on the people, apart from the physical lockdown, in terms of services, in terms of provisions, in terms of the lack of access to social contacts and others. So the newspaper, at least so far, is all talking about headlines, but not talking about the impact on the lives of people. And it's not talking about the economic impact on the people in low income and in poverty. And it's not talking about the role of the local councils, which are very busily issuing many statements, which we shall look at in due course later today. Many statements expressing their concern and their kind of care for the local people in the communities. They refer to the local electors, the local communities in the boroughs as our people in a possessive way, as if they own the people. Now that shows the lack of democracy in the local areas. Quite apart from the corruption, there is no acceptance of even the tokenistic recognition of people in people's own rights. In fact, rights are not recognized by the councils. Rights of the people are not recognized. And we shall illustrate that in due course with examples. Now, going back to housing fraud, there is obviously a routine thing about the NHS needing to be saved. That is a completely stupid way to put it. Now they are doing a kind of token thing about the jobs bloodbath and stockpiling of what is this? Again, the loo rolls. And the fundamental mistake and error and wrong in saying that the lockdown is necessary to save the NHS gives the game away. It says that the NHS is the object of protection, not the lives of people. Simple as that. And everything, every news item, every kind of promotion, which is what Fleet Street does, is promoting various kind of slogans, boils down to these papers treating the readers and the public generally with brazen contempt and disrespect. None of these stories, so-called, is sourced to ordinary people anywhere, despite the fact that the likes of the Mirror Group kind of try to pretend that they are representing the North and the poor people. But that's absolutely not borne out by the fact that they don't report, they don't editorialize, they don't kind of run their decisions to splash on this or that as based on the real life experience of ordinary people. And the papers, and we are talking about the less poisonous and less dishonest ones, only marginally so, but that's still compared to the Murdoch ones and the right-wing ones, extra ultra right-wing ones. The Mirror Group is less, just marginally so, but less poisonous and less dishonest. Even so, the Daily Mirror and the Mirror Group, Sunday People and the Sunday Mirror, are not running stories based on the experience of people at every stage. How many people have been rebuffed in the last 24 hours or in the last week by personnel employed in the NHS institutions or establishments? That's what should be reported. Saving the NHS, what does it mean? It's a slogan. The thing that deserves to be saved is the people's rights and the people's needs being met by the NHS, if these needs are being met. But there is no mention of the rebuffs suffered by people going to the NHS institutions and the care homes or whatever. And there is no reporting about the attitude of consultants, attitude of nurses, attitudes of people who make the decision whether to let people in or refuse people the service and the access to the institutions and the installations and the agencies. Broadly speaking, referred to as the NHS. So there is no diagnosis, there is no audit of the actual behavior, the practice of the NHS anywhere. So what's the point of talking about saving the NHS? It has to be based on the numbers. It has to be based on the attitude. It has to be based on the actual impact on people's lives and people who are in need of urgent care, whether they're getting the care, the respectful and timely and transparent care, or whether they're being neglected, consigned, and condemned to suffer in the corners of so many NHS establishments and care homes. And the Murdoch scum is saying that Johnson has plunged the country into new shutdown. And it says, lockdown horror. Prime Minister's grim Halloween message. That is the headline of the scum. And that is following the right-wing narrative that there should be no lockdown. And on the inside pages, it says that the lockdown will cost, it is implying the UK economy, £1.8 billion each day. In the kind of process of lost economic activity, that's what it is implying. And then on page 6, it has got a picture of Jeremy Corbyn. And it says that if Corbyn is actually ousted by Keir Starmer from the Labour Party, as opposed to suspension, if the suspension is made worse by Corbyn being kicked out of the Labour Party, then there would be a £6 million loss in donor kind of contribution in donations to the Labour Party. And it's mainly donations being withheld by trade unions led by McCluskey's Unite Union. And then there is a horror story, the panic. And there is a kind of scary story. Is it to scare the kind of gullibles and the little Englanders that they're £400 to get in the UK? That is probably about the price that is smugglers cut price lure to channel boat migrants. And they don't say anything about the fact that none of the kind of migrants trafficking traders would exist or be able to operate if the law that exists under the UK's signatory status as a member of the signed up kind of member of the various conventions, international treaties, and especially the Refugee Convention. If the requirements of those were upheld by the UK, then there would be no migration crisis coming through the channel, because everything would be done through the law and the legal process would prevail, but there is no legal process in place. And this scum doesn't want to talk about that. And it is not sure, the scum is not sure whether Trump will get re-elected or Biden would beat Trump. So there is this is a theme that is widespread across the papers listed today, the Sunday papers. They are not sure who is going to win. That's the coverage of these papers from Britain. And Karen Brady, who is a racist mall to the racists, like Alan Sugar and others, is having a go at Kim Kardashian and having a go at her because she's Kim Kardashian is too rich. And she's celebrating Keir Starmer's attack on Jeremy Corbyn. So whether she wrote these things or she had them written for her is secondary, because she's treated as a kind of celeb, and anything in her name is supposed to be her creation, which is not the truth always. And these people are, Karen Brady is part of the problem the society suffers from. And that is not confined to the fact that she is part of the looters and thieves who have stolen the resources from the people of the East End, that is Stratford, which is cited, which is chosen as the site for the 2012 Olympic. Now it has been taken over by crooks and gangs, and she is part of the gang. So she really has no substance in her personally jealous kind of piece against Kim Kardashian. She's not jealous of Kardashian's wealth on principle. She's personally jealous. And the Observer is saying that protests against the second lockdown are sweeping across Western Europe. And this is the first time that there is a piece about the actual virus. It says on page 11 in the Observer that tiny variants in genes may dictate severity of sickness. So at least they're making a connection between the virus and its impact with the genes of the person affected. There should be many more such articles talking about every aspect of the virus and its impact and implication. I mean, lockdown is a cheap slogan to use. When it comes to the actual examination of the details, the physical examination of the details of the virus and its various kind of states and impacts, that would be a difference. And that is the kind of thing that is not covered by either Fleet Street or most of the counterpart publications across Western Europe. In France, in Germany, in Italy, in Greece, nowhere. And there must be an end to the kind of policy without factual evidence being examined. And the Daily Star is almost all front page is given to celebrating the life of Sean Connery. And Nick Ferrari, who is a Boris Johnson supporter, is saying that the American election represents the final fling for angry politics. Now, Ferrari hasn't got a factual basis for saying that, because he is part of the causers of angry politics. And he remains so. And the fact that he has got the notoriety for the LBC radio associated synonymous almost with him is down to the fact that he has incited untruth and hatred and intolerance for the best part of the last 10 years. And it has been for the Brexit, it has been for the right-wingers, the racists, and the anti-Muslims. And there is a piece the piece by Gary Bushell is unmentionable because it's a completely kind of over the top, intentionally written over the top to get himself noticed. And so that I'm not noticing him any more than just mentioning the tactics that he's employing. Now, I know Gary Bushell, who followed me as the editor of the what is now the University of East London Students newspaper in the 70s. He followed me the year after I left in the 70s, after my kind of stint ended. And the Mail on Sunday is using the phrase civil war about the Conservative Party rather than about the Labour Party. And this is the only one that is using the term civil war. And Peter Hitchens says that dictators have taken over the world and we didn't even notice. Now, Peter Hitchens is a revolutionary suitably paid by the agents of dictators. And Michael Gove's wife, Sarah Vanity, has got a typical piece. And there is a unique piece about a woman who migrated from Jamaica. And she is quoted as saying, Ina, 103, war veteran who told Top Brass, I haven't come from Jamaica to be a typist. Good for her. Apart from that, we cannot find anything worth diagnosing except to say that the papers are not doing their job. And so therefore these papers are carrying trash, with slight exceptions like that one about Ina, aged 103. And the main space on the Sunday Times front page is given to, of course, the lockdown that Johnson has been forced to announce. And then the top of the page is distributed between a tribute to Connery and the exclusive Tracy Amin interview, her haunting interview about her illness and the fight with cancer. And they're saying that Johnson had no option but to recognize the facts. And the rest of it is completely clueless. because all the writers and columnists on the Sunday Times are kind of contradicting one another or themselves. Nobody is actually writing about the various stages of the virus and what are the common factors, as I've been saying, that are shared among, well, the countries of the Western Europe region that they can actually relate to. Because they imitate one another, they follow one another, they copy one another. That's the thing. There's a cultural thing. And of course, a racist thing. And the world does not extend to beyond the Mediterranean. What is happening in Asia, what's happening in the continents of Asia and Africa is not mentioned. There is no recognition. These papers, they've got about, what, for 5,000, 6,000 pages. But we are not literally looking at all these, every single page. What we are looking at is the main news so-called side. And there is nothing. There is no mention of the world beyond the Mediterranean. The Observer just about managed to mention some countries, but the others even don't mention the other countries in Western Europe, which is where the world is. So they are brainwashing relentlessly about the existence of the world. How can they be trusted by the people and the public to be telling the truth about the virus, about society? They cannot be trusted because there is no social aspect to their coverage. There is no acknowledgement of the impact of any government measures on the lives of the majority, the many people. And this applies to, of course, the housing human rights, because we continue what we started in the first part. And we look at the role of Tar Hamlets Council employee during Lutfur Rahman's kind of incumbency in that post, role of 2 or 3 employees called Jackie Odunoy, and one is called Aman Dalby, and one is called Colin Cormack. These are 3 of the liars that Lutfur Rahman kind of used or colluded with in order to deny the legal duties and the evidence-based duties of extremely urgent needs for housing, and they sabotaged. Now, this is a letter dated the 4th of July, Thursday. Now, this is a letter that I sent on the 4th of July, Thursday, the 4th of July, and I sent it to Jackie Odunoy. And she sent the email at 6 minutes past 6 on the following day, which is Friday, the 5th of July. And she said in that email, "Dear Mr. Haque, thank you for this further detail on your questions, both at Cabinet on Wednesday and at Full Council on 26th of June. Both occurred in 2013. There are a number of issues here, and I am now working on a fuller answer to you. I will respond again by next Friday, 12th of July, as I want to properly check each area of your questions before answering. And she signs herself Jackie Odunoy, Service Head, Strategy, Regeneration and Sustainability. Before going into the other parts of the correspondence, let me say that she never answered my questions. This is 7 years ago. And what has happened in the time between that email correspondence and now will be detailed later, either later today or in other kind of parts on other dates. Essentially, what I'm saying here on the evidence is that people in posts like service head, strategy, regeneration, sustainability, these are frighteningly misleading words for them to use, because she is not doing anything truthfully, honestly, for any of those values: sustainability and objectively defined regeneration and objectively defined strategy. So therefore, on the evidence of her distortion of each of those values, I have worked and renamed the words and the values. For example, regeneration, I have called, and I have been calling it, degeneration, based on the evidence of the council's behavior. And they don't sustain anything, they destroy things. And it is very much a destruction of what should be the most revered kind of set of items that is at the center of this evidential, empirical diagnosis. Jackie Odunoy, as the title kind of suggests, she was in post at the time. I don't know what she's doing today. I mean, I don't know what she's been doing in the last few years, because I have not been updating the kind of inquiries into her whereabouts or her role. But at the time, she communicated to me on the apparent kind of instructions of Lutfur Rahman, who told her on the 3rd of July 2013, after I had finished reading that 220-word, 22-word question to the so-called cabinet on that date, Lutfur Rahman asked her to respond and reply. Now, she was there, as was Colin Cormack. And even if Aman Dalby wasn't there, he might have been there. Aman Dalby was there later. So these three lied, as did Lutfur Rahman, because the trap that they set, Lutfur Rahman thought that he was being clever and that I was not seeing through his lying. All the while, I was seeing through his lying and I was making a note of it. But the paramount thing that I was kind of addressing was to give them the opportunity, the benefit of the doubt, and the opportunity to correct, even as late as the stage where they would be correcting it, the wrongs that they had done. And I kept giving them these opportunities openly, transparently, and consistently throughout these 6 calendar years that Lutfur Rahman was in post as the incumbent, quote, elected mayor. Now, any student of the kind of literature that passes for constitution of the local councils would know that the real kind of core essence of this post is in the fact that it is unaccountable. Pause there, think about that. Now, even if a kind of literally, demonstrably, completely intellectually, very seriously challenged person were put in that position, they would immediately compensate for that intellectual challenge by recruiting any number of persons from any kind of quarters, and they would not be accountable for any of it. As the records show, as the evidence shows, Lutfur Rahman was never held to account, not even asked a question about what he was doing. In the serious decisions that were being made to criminally defy the most important duties of the council, including the duties owed to me and to my kind of movement on the campaign and the community at large that I was representing in various kind of details in my engagement, constitutional, ethical, and democratic and transparent and cohesive engagement with the entity called Tower Hamlets, the local borough council, with the express intention of making that council deliver what its duties obliged it to deliver. And I was giving 24-hour updates on the fact that these were not being delivered. And I was giving the updates to Lutfur Rahman and holding him responsible for the lies and the lying. And what Lutfur Rahman did was to use or abuse his position and let Alibor Chaudhry make contacts with me on his behalf. And Alibor Chaudhry always answered my question. Was he telling the truth? Was Lutfur Rahman telling the truth? And if so, what was the evidence? Alibor Chaudhry always assured me that Lutfur Rahman was telling the truth and he was telling the truth on his behalf. I mean, Alibor Chaudhry told me that he was making communications to me truthfully on behalf of Lutfur Rahman. Now that raises the question, what was the actual kind of reason for the obstructions? Because the center of all these communications were the decisions made by the council on two separate things. One is to do with the behavior of Steve Hill and Colin Cormack. Let's put them together. And the other is the behavior of the Spitalfield Small Business Association in relation to 164 Brick Lane and the collectively known space known as the Kitten's House. The Kitten's House is a big kind of space, one big room, which was one of the spaces where large numbers and amounts of papers and documents and materials were kept. And they had to be brought there in order to protect them from being destroyed by Tower Hamlets Community Housing, with whom Steve Hill was in constant conspiracy so that they could have an excuse to make an application to a county court to have me evicted from my council flat, which became the property of Tower Hamlets Community Housing as a result of the transfer of the council housing stock. Remember, this part is the evidence detail that I've been promising to broadcast. And this is why anyone who is not able to follow this can have a replay and can see what I'm referring to. So there is no problem. It's not just a document. This record can be played back and you can locate exact sentences that I'm uttering and names I'm mentioning and the events I'm mentioning. And all of this I'm doing also to update and enlighten the viewer on why the formal charging of Afsana Begum with 3 counts of housing fraud will not solve the housing fraud and housing corruption in Tower Hamlets Council. And what I said before was that, or includes the assertion, evidential assertion, that since Tower Hamlets as a borough council was created in April 1965, all the council leadership, whether or all of them were kind of leader-led council administrations, until the infliction of the elected mayor in October 2010. All the kind of decisions made by the leader of the council at the time were made without democratic agreement of the elected councillors. They were formally kind of democratically supported these decisions, but they were not. And that is one of the reasons why the resources of the council or the resources made available to Tower Hamlets Council have never been held to public account or accountability. And many of the decisions of previous council leaders were as corrupt as the decisions made by Lutfur Rahman. So the difference between the structure as mayor-led or leader-led didn't stop corruption and criminality being done by the person who was either leader or mayor. So in relation to this, I have to say that I'm the main opponent of the mayor system. And when I oppose, I don't say that I just want a replacement of the mayor system with the leader-led or cabinets-led council structure. I say there has to be the transparent establishment of democratic process and procedures in place in Tower Hamlets Council. Of course, I mean, that starts with the removal of the mayor post, but that doesn't mean that the removal automatically brings in democracy, accountability, and investigation and opposition to an end of corruption and criminality. For that to happen, the entire elected council must be aware of its duties. Elected individual councillors have to be seen to be aware of their duties and have to be seen to be carrying out their duties. It's a long order, tall order, but that's the least that these people must be made to deliver to the local council, local community, local borough. As I have said, 3 of the recent persons, all of them councillors, have been prosecuted and found guilty and have been jailed on various types of charges containing or constituting housing fraud. One is Shalina Akhtar, and the other two, Shahid Ali and Harun, Councillor Muhammad Harun. All three of them have been jailed for token terms. They have not been jailed for proportionate length of times warranted by their various perpetrations. But they have been jailed, and that has been used as a trigger to end their being councillors at the time. But these three, they have been prosecuted at intervals of various years between them. That shows that the council continued to be open to council housing fraud, which means that there was and there has not been anything in place to stop fraudsters doing the frauds, which means that the employees in place in the housing and housing related kind of posts and positions have themselves been complicit with the dominant culture of corruption and criminality, which is why Steve Hill, the person who has been benefits manager in the name of Hrs Council, is one of the criminals who should be prosecuted and who should be made, in other cases, responsible for the multi-billion pound losses and damages that he and Cormac and Aman Dalby and Lutfur Rahman have caused. So all of them have to be made responsible, liable to pay the billions of pounds of damages and losses and other losses. Because somebody who manipulates and abuses the council's quote powers to allocate housing, allocation including nomination to an external body like a housing association, can only do that if there is the dominant culture in the council which allows this kind of behavior and which approves this kind of behavior. As Lutfur Rahman showed, he, on my kind of matter, in front of me, he kept asking Aman Dalby to have meetings with me, and he assured me that that would be the end of any issues and that Dalby would resolve them. Now, it's not Dalby only. Lutfur Rahman said other people as well, including himself. As I said, I met Lutfur Rahman on the 20th of September 2012 in the basement of a restaurant in New Road, London E1, that used to be called Marco's, which is no longer trading in that name. And at that meeting were also present, without my knowledge or approval, Alibor Chaudhry and the Channel S, quote, chief reporter called Mohammed Jubair. When I asked Lutfur why Jubair was there, Lutfur answered that Jubair was one of his younger brothers. Now, what that had anything to do with his being present at a meeting about confidential issues was not explained, and it was not acceptable. But I was not there to kind of get diverted into a discussion about why Jubair was there. I just raised the question as to why he was there. because Jubair was not a member of the council and Jubair was not a member of the Tower Hamlets Council staff. And what I was there to discuss with Lutfur was to do with the behavior of the council staff. So it was not a public event at that stage in that way. And it was a confidential matter because I named one holder of a senior post called Colin Cormack. So it was in breach of the Data Protection Act and other things that Lutfur was committing an illegal act by allowing Jubair to be there. Alibor Chaudhry was partially kind of understandably there because Alibor Chaudhry had acted as the communication go-between myself and Lutfur Rahman. But Jubair had no such record. He may have had access to information, like he made a phone call after that particular meeting about the fact that Bashir Chaudhry, whom I had objected to being involved at all, had not delivered what Lutfur promised Bashir Chaudhry would deliver. And I knew from a long acquaintance of Bashir Chaudhry's activities that he would not deliver. So this is the kind of exact vindication of exact positions that I have taken and exact evidence that I am updating on, that I say that the prosecution, whatever the outcome of Afsana Begum or anybody else with similar kind of fraud, will not solve the corruption that dominates Tower Hamlets Council in housing, in other areas of its responsibilities. The fact that John Biggs, accurately described by the Guardian's Dan Sabag in April 2018 as the diminutive John Biggs, has made a kind of attempt in the last few days to show that he is actually prepared to give up some of his powers in order that he stays as mayor and that the mayor system remains. Now, this is a very dangerous person because he is, committing a planned deception of the community by saying that everything he has done as the dictator since 11th of June 2015 up till now will be changed from now on. It will not be. And we shall be continuing on John Biggs and the mayor system after we finish talking about the kind of charge that has been brought against Afsana Begum. Afsana Begum was in post as an employee in Tower Hamlets Council. I think the general description of her kind of department or section was the mayor's office, because it was there that I spoke to her on the telephone when I tried to speak to another employee called Miss Jeeps. And I left messages for Miss Jeeps. And I also received a number of communications by email from somebody called Afsana Begum. I didn't know her, except that I came to know from the emails that I received from the council, sent to me apparently from an email address in the name of Afsana Begum. I now know that she is the daughter of the man that I helped long before she was even born. But that's a different issue, just except to say the time when I became aware of who she was in terms of the parentage and where she was born and everything. Now, Afsana Begum wrote to me on behalf of Ohid Ahmad. And what she wrote to me must have been told her or dictated to her by somebody else. Whether it was Ohid Ahmad himself, I am not saying, because there is no indication that it was him. But what she sent to me was on behalf of Ohid Ahmad's position. Ohid Ahmad himself, in separate communications, sent to me words to the effect that I should leave him out of these communications. By these communications, he was referring to my ongoing communications addressed to Lutfur Rahman and his regime.